Good morning. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for this important discussion. My name is Opas Khalwe, um, and I work for the South African Weather Service. I will be facilitating this dialogue this morning. Let me also take a moment to welcome all of those who are joining us online, including members of the media. Thank you so much for your interest. So, what are we doing here? This is
This is
a
a
roundtable
roundtable
discussion which will focus
focus
on
on
extreme weather patterns, um, with a little bit more focus also on early warnings for all, the early warnings for all initiative that we know, um, was the brainchild of the United Nations. And this roundtable is brought to you by the Government Communication and Information System in collaboration with the South African Weather Service. Now, to set the tone for the discussion, I will preach to the choir, so to speak. So please bear with me. Um, as colleagues, we probably are aware that South Africa is one of those countries in the southern parts of the continent that are susceptible to extreme weather events. I mean, just this week we saw a tornado ripping through Randfontein on the west end and causing a whole lot of devastation there. And this happens at the time when we had just experienced another tornado event in eThekwini, in Otongati, which also caused a whole lot of devastation there. And in between those two events, we saw um, a disruptive snow event with people getting stranded on the N3 for hours and hours on end. And unfortunately, we also lost a life or two during that particular event because of exposure to extreme cold conditions. So I suppose those are some of the events that paint the picture for us in terms of the kind of weather patterns that we've been experiencing as a country over the last couple of years. And that's what we are going to drill down into during our discussion. And we have assembled a panel of accomplished experts, especially in the area of disaster risk reduction. And I'll introduce them briefly before we get started. Starting with the gentleman seated right next to me, his name is Ntate Puseletso Mofokeng. He has a wealth of experience in this area, about 24 years of experience in meteorology. He's a meteorologist and a senior forecaster with the South African Weather Service. In his 24 years of experience, he spent about 18 of those on weather forecasting, and the rest of the years were spent on weather observations, data collection, quality control, analysis, and interpretation. And of course, he's one of the four team leaders at the South African Weather Service National Forecasting Office, which is where we are right now. And they are tasked with forecasting weather across the country with a specific focus on the first 7 days of extreme weather conditions. You may have noticed in the media release that we issued yesterday that he was the author of that piece talking about the tornado that hit Randfontein yesterday. And as part of his duties, he interacts a lot with disaster management authorities at all levels, from local all the way to national. And he's also active internationally as well, serving as the producer of severe weather advisories for national weather services in the SADC region. And he also serves as a member of the advisory group on severe weather forecasting. In fact, in December this year, Wits University will be conferring on him a Master of Science degree in Geography. That is Ntate Puseletso Mofokeng. And then sitting next to him is Mr. Declan Pillay, who is a senior manager at the National Disaster Management Center. He has been there for 13 years, working alongside the National Disaster Management team, and he has a master's degree in GIS and remote sensing, as well as an MBA from the Gordon Institute of Business Science. He specializes in the use of information tools to provide risk assessment and early warning services at the National Center, that is the NDMC. And of course, joining us online, we have Ms. Annette Botha, who is a meteorologist at Vox Weather. She is the dynamic force behind that independent digital weather channel, that is Vox Weather, and she holds an honors degree in meteorology. She combines her academic expertise and on-screen charisma to make weather engaging, accessible, and impactful. Ms. Botha's career spans, or rather, it spans impressive roles with e-media's news giants, that is ENCA, E-News, and ETV, where she has managed to keep viewers informed and prepared. Her love for meteorology is matched only by her passion for communicating critical issues like extreme weather and climate change. And through that platform, Vox Weather, she brings a modern twist to forecasting, and you should think vibrant visuals, in-depth analysis, and an unrelenting focus on severe weather and environmental awareness. So that is our panel, ladies and gentlemen. They will help us to interrogate this discourse. And without further ado, I would like to give each of them a few minutes to state in broad terms the overview in respect of the subject matter. And the first bite will go to Dr. Mufuken, sitting right next to me here, to talk to us about this important matter.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sakhale. Basically, adding to what you just said moments ago, the South African Weather Service, as you know, it's charged with issuing the severe weather forecast. We also issue the ordinary forecast for ordinary events. But we put more emphasis on the extreme weather forecast. That is kind of just referred to the moments of the two moments, the recent moment that happened, including many other events that we had a very good success on. You would remember earlier this year, we issued a very successful forecast for the snowfall, and we are continuing. I do know that from time to time, we will be asked as to whether we're doing well. We're doing well indeed, because all the events, it is easy basically to focus. Very, very easy. The difference will be when we have those isolated storms, like the one that had just occurred over Randfontein. That is extremely difficult. Is what we explained there on the Middle East is very complex because it needs a combination of events, two storms, the topography effect, and things like that. So those kind of events do not feature basically in terms of forecasting. And it's not only the only event. There are many other events where you find topography changes what we have forecasted. But as we have committed, we are working very hard to cover such small-scale events. We are actually working heavily, both as the South African Weather Service and also the potential students out there. There are a lot of other progressive inputs that they have done to how we forecast, and we are very much receptive on that. So, besides giving the forecast over the country for the public, we also specialize on issuing forecasts for the aviation industry. So, the aviation industry will actually get the information for the takeoff, for landing, and all that. So, those are the things that we do, the on-road forecast. We also have very massive responsibility for issuing marine-related alerts. For instance, you would have the waves, the sea waves, which are very important. Remember, there are people who interact with the sea all the time. So that is also our responsibility, both along the coast and into the deep sea. The area of responsibility is quite huge. I think worldwide we are the second. We have the second biggest area after NOAA. Without NOAA, obviously, we have the biggest area. So our focus is used quite widely by many other weather providers out there. So that is generally what we do. And like I indicated, as much as we give the focus on daily basis, we are actually working on even improving on the localized events. That is, in short, lay the ground.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mufuke. Let's now give the platform to Mr. Pillay to share with us perspectives from the National Disaster Management Center. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Facilitator. Maybe just to indicate that from the National Disaster Management Center, we have a mandate to coordinate and manage disasters at the national level. So we work through the provincial and local sphere, guided by the disaster management legislation and the framework. And we also are responsible for a level of funding to coordinate the response to disaster management. And this is all within the context of increasing disasters across all countries, but specifically in the Southern African region, fueled by climate-induced extreme weather patterns. And we're seeing larger scale impacts on communities across global countries, but especially in South Africa, and especially amongst the vulnerable community. I think the recently launched Early Warnings for All initiative is a step in the right direction that involves us improving the early warnings initiative across the different pillars of the Early Warnings for All initiative. And we are able to do that by investing in the 4 pillars until 2027, where we're going to be collaborating with different organizations to ensure that early warnings messages increase in terms of their rigor from a risk perspective, that we improve our observation and networking capabilities, we improve our response plans, and we also provide the necessary financing to invest in that. I think that we've just consulted the national workshop for early warnings for all that brought all the key role players together across the 4 pillars. We've just finalized the national report in draft format, and we're looking at creating the roadmap for us to function with other international countries to improve the early warning system across the 4 pillars. And we're hopefully going to receive much success in terms of that as we try and improve the early warnings messages to mitigate the disastrous effects of severe weather in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clay, for that input. I know that work is underway to finalize the country plan in respect of that particular initiative, but we'll talk about that in a moment. I just want to invite at this point Ms. Botha to make her opening remarks before we can have that interactive session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. First and foremost, I want to just express my sincere gratitude for this initiative and the government's communication informative system, and also SOARS for organizing this roundtable discussion. I think it's a very important and timely topic. I'm honored to be here with you, and especially with my fellow panelists that's got a whole list of degrees. So that's really, I feel I'm very honored, and thank you for giving me this platform to also share my thoughts and collaborate on something that really impacts us all very, very deeply. So as you've heard, I'm Annette Botha. I'm a qualified meteorologist and also the founder of Vox Weather. So I think at Vox Weather, we try and work hard to make, weather information just, accessible, engaging and impactful for everyone. So yeah, we want to bring weather forecasting into the digital space, creating it in a way that is understandable, more vibrant, easy updates that can reach anyone everywhere, whether you're on your phone, online, or on TikTok, or everywhere. I think it's very important to be able to reach every single South African when it comes to early weather warnings. So we've heard that South Africa has been very challenging when it comes to devastating weather conditions. Like we've heard about the tornado in Randfontein, developed from a landslide and strengthened into a tornado. And we've had the historical snowfall in parts of KZN. And as we've known, we've all heard that people got stuck on the M3. So yeah, I think today I want to emphasize that collaboration is key. That's what I feel. That's very key between governments, between the South African Weather Service, disaster risk management, private organizations, and even the local communities. So extreme weather, it doesn't discriminate. It affects us all. We know that. So it's up to us to ensure that early weather warnings reach everyone, and they don't just, inform, but they actually empower action. One of the things that I would like to discuss is also the confusion that I sometimes see on our form when it comes to the South African Weather Service impact-based warning system. While it's a step up
recording in progress,
designed to help people, prepare for potential consequences from extreme weather, I do feel like some people definitely still finds it a bit confusing. Maybe we should talk about, step into simplifying the system, educating the people, investing more in education about the different warning levels. After all, we all know that early warnings is only as effective as the public's ability to act upon it. And so that's something that I feel like we should discuss in this roundtable. And then another discussion or suggestion that, as a, completely entity that's not part of the government or, private sector, we are part of the private sector, I would like to put forward today is, the idea of maybe starting some type of program like the Weather Ready National Ambassador Initiative that NOAA is doing in the United States. So we all know NOAA. So we know that this program recognizes different partners who are actively working in the communities to make more resilient to extreme weather. So when you have a group of ambassadors, they play a vital role in building the trust, educating people, strengthening preparedness at a ground level, at grassroots level. And so, I don't know, just imagine we could all achieve a similar something, bringing schools together, businesses, communities, even people like us at Box Weather, who's more seen like local influences that can bridge this gap between early warnings and the community and taking action. So, just to wrap up, I believe this is a very important, pivotal moment. The Early Weather Warnings for All initiative is an incredible opportunity to make sure no one in South Africa is left behind when it comes to severe weather preparedness. So I think today's discussion is taking the next step. And this is about, collaboration, communicating and talking about these extreme weather events and problems that we have in South Africa. So thank you, everyone. And thank you for the time. I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you so much, Annette, for that input. You raised very important points there, the accessibility of the warnings, the importance of collaboration and all of that. And those are some of the thematic areas that we'll touch on in a moment. Just as we enter the next phase of our discussion, where we are going to interact more with our panelists and all of those who are joining us online, I just want to draw the attention of everyone to the fact that we just had, the 29th Conference of Partners just 2 weeks ago. And I recall in his opening speech, the Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Guterres, did touch on this important matter of early warnings for all. And just for the benefit of everyone, Early Warnings for All initiative is a 2-year-old program which originated from the UN. And in terms of that particular initiative, nations of the world are being called upon to do their bit to see to it that everyone on Earth is protected from the effects of hazardous weather, water, and climate events by 2027. And early warning systems play a critical role in that respect. And this brings me to what the Secretary General of the UN said at the previous Conference of Partners, or COP28. He made very sobering observations there. Among the things he said was that half of the world, including Africa in its entirety, are not, or rather are defenseless against natural hazards, and that there was a slow pace in terms of introducing early warning systems. And the fact that people were moving slowly to address that problem, he said, was going to spell disaster in the long run. He mentioned that delayed action in these circumstances means more deadly extreme weather events, more deaths, more destruction, and less ability to recover. And he also noted that those on the front line of the climate crisis will pay the highest price. So that just gives you a perspective in terms of where we are as a country and as the globe at large. And I just want to touch on those things, or rather invite one of my colleagues here to touch briefly on that matter. We have experienced all of these events that I referred to earlier on in my opening in that Mfuke. As the South African Weather Service, what steps do we take, to issue warnings with enough lead time for people to be able to take the necessary steps to cushion themselves from the effects of this kind of events?
Well, perhaps as I indicated earlier, there are events where we are very successful, and we should pride ourselves on that success. For instance, if you remember in 2017, those heavy floods in Devon, the warning was given 3 days before. Of course, the challenge is that depending on the magnitude of the impact, it was said that the amount of time was very little, but we try. So there are those events, big events, where we will actually issue a warning way in advance. For instance, if the cutoff flow is coming, it's easy to give a prediction ahead in time. Let's say 5 days, you can write immediately, 3 days, and all that. So that is well within our capability. I don't think we struggle much on that one. That's why I'm saying at least we have to pride ourselves quite a lot in terms of that kind of success. We are also having a challenge, but that challenge is not a challenge that is not surmountable. You remember that we do have a research department, quite strong research department. But maybe let me give a historical background. Many years ago, the South African Weather Service did not have the research component. I'm talking about the 50s, the 40s back then. It was difficult to forecast. But then the inclusion of the research has been quite important in terms of bringing forward a lot of change, a lot of improving the forecast. That we have to recognize. The research component we have is continuing to be strong. At the moment, we are using what we call data assimilation, which necessarily improve on what the model fails to do. In other words, what the model would predict, weather models would do, it will give us a broad view of what could happen. But with the inclusion of observation, which is data assimilation, you then have your forecast adjusted. In that way, the lead time improve in terms of the short events, the event with short lead time. So, but that's not all. We're still researching, both as the component of research and forecaster. Some of us really have gone out there to research because there are certain aspects which are not necessarily handled by the models. For instance, the tornado itself. The view that we expressed on the media release just yesterday was because of the hard research. I think that research took about 7 years to necessarily make sense of the 34 tornadoes that were used to actually come up with how a tornado developed. And again, I must point out that with regard to how we name that, what is the tornado on that spot, it is important. Maybe let me give historical background to it. Initially, it was not necessary to identify whether it's a tornado or landspout. I'm talking about the years before 1983. But after 1983, I think there was one researcher from the US who necessarily came up with the idea to say, because of how landspout developed, it was not there, it was just a tornado before. So, but because the initiation starts from the ground up, then it came the term landspout. So that is important. It was part of the research. What is important, sometimes we juggle as to whether it's a tornado or landspout. But that's a minor difference. So necessarily speaking, we are working hard on all events, including those which models cannot handle. So again, we're not only scientific, we are very much relational in terms of the public. We try by all means to make our messages very simple. Even what we wrote yesterday, there are a lot of people who are academic who came with, no, this is not like this, but how we communicate with the public, the message must be simple. I'm sure my colleague in weather business, Annette, would actually confirm that indeed there's a simplicity that has to be applied to pass the scientific message. Behind the scenes, we work very hard, but we also have to strike a balance how we come through. For instance, it's not only where we would have difficulty in terms of whether it's a tornado or landslide. There are times when a cut-off flow would run through the country, and we would actually issue it as what we call public front. The public front is just to tell the public the cold air is coming. Sometimes it's not necessarily a cold front, but because it is what people understand, that's what we give to them. So we also make sure that disaster management is on board. We work very hard with them. I think you are quite aware our programs are active from January to December. In fact, sometimes even during Christmas Day or first day of the year, we would actually be there if there's a severe weather. So we actually are making sure that we are out there. But besides that, let's also remember that we have our colleagues in the region. I'm talking about African region in SADC and in Africa as well. So we work very hard in order to actually bring a common agenda. The very early warning for all is one thing that we're working on quite strongly.
Of course, thank you so much. I was going to touch on the issue of the tornado later, but now that you have brought it up, let me just pose this last question to you. This morning, we were going through the comments on the post that we placed on Facebook yesterday, and there were questions from members of the public. One question that struck a chord with me was one that was suggesting that we make known information about the tornado after it has hit. So the person was suggesting that we should have alerted them ahead of the tornado. I know there's a science to that, and I'm trusting you to explain it to us in simple terms so that people understand why we communicate tornado specifically in that fashion.
I think in my earlier opening remarks, I indicated that this is complex. In the case of Randfontein, it's not possible to issue a warning beforehand. What we commit to in terms of the research that we're conducting is that we can only extend by tens of minutes, not by an hour or days. That is not possible. Why? Because you have two storms that tornado forms from two storms in the South African case. There has been quite a reference in terms of literature from the US. And it's important to learn from our colleagues in US and any other part of the world. But in South Africa, tornado developed from two storms. So that is important. Very good identification that has happened. Now, you also have to filter in the issue of topography. If you look at the valley that we pointed out, very small. So you need the other storm to connect with the other through the channel. How possible is that the model can see that ahead of time? It's not possible. So the only thing that can be done is to at least add on top of what we have done. We add the artificial intelligence to necessarily tell us as to when the storm changes direction in front of the other storm.
Yeah.
So in that case, those tens of minutes can actually come. But before that, it will always be a case of after event. But let's also remember, in 2017, December 30, at 16:42, we issued a warning for tornado, the first time ever to be issued. And because we issued that warning, it was quite a success. I think we had only 4 minutes. The warning was issued 4 minutes before the tornado reached the ground. Not because we saw it, but because we're analyzing our radar technology, which actually showed that there's a potential for a tornado. So from that 4 minutes, we're working on including tens of minutes. It's not something easy because one has to work out the strength of the wind without the measurement, without the equipment to measure. So you have to now bring along the artificial intelligence. My colleague who spent a lot of time in Europe he was actually saying as to that there's a colleague in the Europe who actually is working on bringing about identification of the strength of the strength of the gas front or the outflow without the measurement, which is quite an improvement. So that's something that we have to work on and take advantage of.
Of course, thank you so much. And of course, there was a warning issued in the morning, hours ahead of the particular event for a severe thunderstorm. And as we understand it, in a thunderstorm, anything can happen, including the tornadoes. But we'll come back to this in a moment. I want to bring in Mr. Pillay now from the National Disaster Management Center. Mr. Pillay, let's take the example of the snow event that we saw in September. A warning is issued, I think it was a couple of days before.
It was 2 days.
2 days, yes, before the actual event.
On just more than 24 hours.
Yes. What on receipt of that kind of warning, and of course warnings, as much as we put them out on all these platforms for the public, they also go directly to disaster management. What steps does the disaster management take from that moment? In other words, how do you prevent a catastrophe from the perspective of disaster management upon receipt of this information from the weather center?
Thank you. I think that let me start by just concentrating on the hazard of snow. I think at the Disaster Management Center, we've invested quite a bit of time and effort into the research around the hazards. So we have compiled with the CSIR, looking at snow over the years, the frequency of snow, the frequency and magnitude of the hazard over the country, and we've realized that it's not unusual for us to get snow at the time that we did receive it.
Yeah.
So we always get snow, late into spring and early summer. But we also consider where the snow fell in the last incident and the topography of the area. In the actual advisory forum that we issue, and we bring all our disaster management stakeholders together with the province, we actually provide them with a seasonal outlook for the hazard. And during that period of the snow, we went back to how we had predicted it on the ground. And we found a very good correlation spatially from where we had initiated the aspect of snow to fall and where it actually fell during that snow season. So I think from a forward-looking point of view, from a hazard and a seasonal preparedness, we're able to model the hazard based on your South African Weather Services climatical seasonal outlook sort of view, and we are able then to provide that. The problem really comes at the local level when there has to be actions associated with mitigating the hazard. And I think the early warnings are provided, but there's no actions linked to the warning from a broad response perspective. So in the ideal world, what would have happened is the local municipalities that receive the seasonal outlook with the hazard profile for snow would have immediately gauged that we are going to have sporadic snow events during this period until we get to a certain time of the summer season. And then put into place certain contingency measures and activities that they needed to perform, so that in that event they were able to activate those at a quick onset or a quick turnaround time and provide the assistance needed. Now, having said that, we also know that there's nothing that you can do about the hazard when it's such a snow, when it's starting to fall, right? It's sometimes overwhelming. The normal operations on the N3 were moving. It was the time of that period where it was a long weekend. So obviously the activation of the N3 for holidaymakers going down, and the announcement from the weather service really created this almost spectator perception that people from Gauteng want to see the snow, their kids want to play in the snow, and so forth. So it created a little bit of a perfect storm kind of situation, because we already knew when the warning was issued, what will actually happen at that time, and we tried to prepare for our local municipalities through our provinces to take the necessary actions. So although a lot of actions were taken, such as closing off the entry in certain areas to prevent 800 cars per hour moving through a toll gate to get to a place, that would have really made the situation on the entry even worse. We did have people that were on the road at that time and actually got to the place where they were actually overwhelmed by the snow in terms of mobility. And it so happened that um, we had one fatality, but we also had varying levels of preparedness. I think it's the way that commuters now in modern times travel, because there's so many stops, there wasn't enough water, there wasn't enough food. So that preparedness aspect has to come into disaster mitigation from a response perspective. In the older days, the holiday makers used to have a luncheon. So now the luncheon is in the form of a Wimpy restaurant on the N3, and those are things that we have to equip South African commuters and communities with in terms of that. The last thing I want to say is that the mitigation response at local level also needs to be bolstered. And I think that's where the early warnings for all spreads this thing of capacitating at a local level from a response perspective, from an early action perspective. So the large infrastructure needed, the cranes, the clearing, mobile devices, has to be in place at the local municipality or shared and coordinated. So it's almost like an incident command system that we have to put in place for the hazard. And those are the things that we need to almost bring at an optimal level. It was there when the snow fell, but I think that snow response plan that brings all the actors and stakeholders together really helps. And I think the aspect of weather services from a modern prediction point of view is also necessary, because many of the commuters were able to get on their smartphones and look at what the warnings were and look at the responses from the communities that could bring relief to them. I know that parents with little newborns were helped on the road, and although we took some time to coordinate, we did coordinate in that area with our local responses, and relief was provided. So there were evacuation sites identified on that morning. We also got the South African Defence Force ready. We also had mobile aviation prepared to move people should we get a break in the actual weather. Obviously, weather prevents evacuation of people, but it's an all of society approach to a hazard that we have to be familiar with as we move towards extreme weather conditions that are either prolonged in terms of days, so goes on for more than 3 days, where you get the warning 2 days before, but you have to stay within the process of mitigating and responding to the hazard in the 3 days that you find yourself in.
Of course, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Clay, for that. Colleagues in the room, those of you who wish to pose a question to our esteemed panelists, this would be the right time to do so. The same goes for colleagues who are joining us online. You are invited to drop your questions on the chat room, and they will be read out here for our panelists. But Mr. Pillay, before I go to Ms. Botha, you mentioned something important, evacuation. I recall reading an article in one of the Sunday papers. I think there was a flooding event in Cape Town, and the water was this high in some of the areas. And there was a view that sometimes when you are on the ground as disaster management officials, doing your job, such as evacuating people, there are instances where there is a pushback from members of the community or individuals in that community. I suppose there's this question of attachment to personal belongings and all of them, such that the gentleman in question, in terms of that news report, was caught up in that unfortunate incident because he did not yield when disaster management authorities requested that he evacuate. How do you deal with those kind of experience?
So the inability to evacuate based on some circumstantial reason that they provide in the case of disasters has really credibility from a situational perspective, because you have to be on the ground to understand why people don't want to evacuate. When we're dealing with large-scale droughts and floods, we find that rural communities are reluctant to evacuate their properties because of the security of their tenure in terms of their land and their property, and also this crime factor that we sort of have when a disaster is sort of unfolding. So, in terms of our response on the ground, evacuation is when we foreseeing that the hazard is going to be prolonged, and our mitigation and response efforts are going to be limited. And limited because we are unable to respond due to the bad weather. We don't have access. There's a road closure, such as your Jacobsfontein mining disaster. And in those instances, we try and use the local communities to assist in situ, or we are able then to move them to the closest facility for self-keeping. But we, in the snow event, you must notice that we also found safe central parking for the vehicles to be kept, so that we could provide some security of tenure for the commodities that the person has. The other issue around evacuation is, where do we evacuate to, and what is the conditions where we're going to be evacuating to. In the July 2022 floods, we found that evacuation shelters had really problems of their own. We had matriculants writing exams, and they were kept in shelters. They needed to be transported to school. We had a mix of genders. We had a mix of vulnerable groups, pregnant women versus women that were not pregnant, and we needed to provide special care. So evacuation places as a whole has their own issues that we have to mitigate as we plan in terms of disasters. So our response is really to work at a local level, to provide those high levels of confidence that we can evacuate in terms of the holistic area, in terms of the holistic element. So we move cars, we move people, we look at the shortest time for evacuation, and whatever we need to supplement those evacuees with, such as warm meals, blankets, safe places to stay away from the hazard.
Thank you very much. Annette, let me bring you in at this point. The gentleman seated to my right, of course, operate within the public sector. And you are on the outside looking in and hearing what they have got to say in respect of, the early issuing of warnings and the extent to which the public responds, in a responsible manner, in such a way that we are able to save lives. Can you weigh in on that? What do you observe as one operating on the outside?
Thank you very much. I just want to actually commend and also agree with what both my colleagues, Mr. Mofokeng and Mr. Pillay, said about the warnings that were issued in advance by the South African Weather Service. We do get these warnings as well on a forum. And then as a private entity, we always address to the warnings being issued by the South African Weather Service when it goes out. So in the case of the snow event in September, yes, we, like they've mentioned, our panel, that snow is normal for this time of the year. I think where we should bridge the gap is more about how we communicate different types of snowfall events. Even though snow is normal for September in South Africa, this was definitely a historical snowfall event. And as my colleagues have mentioned, models were suggesting that we are going to get above normal snow over certain areas. So I would say from, a private sector or just an online channel that tries to communicate these types of warnings, I think where we could bridge a gap between governments and private is the way that we work together to communicate these types of warnings. So, for example, yes, warnings are issued in advance, and then they are a level 2 warning. But then on the day, the South African Weather Service is very good at then increasing those warnings to, let's say, a orange level 8, for example, that we had for the cuts of low system that was the flooding in KZN. And as the event was happening, they also increased it to a level 10 warning for flooding. So I think there's a little bit of confusion when it comes to the public of what to take serious and what to, how do I handle these warnings, where I feel like there should be a place where communication is done in a way that it's more accessible and at your doorstep, to everyone, where they understand it and be like, okay, this is a warning issued by the South African Weather Service for the possibility of severe storms. Let's, for say, example, yesterday over Gauteng. Great, I'm going to be aware of it. I know this might happen. And then on the day, entities should try and work together where we are tracking these types of storms, which is possible. You can track a storm and see like, okay, it is starting to get a bit more severe. Let's talk to the disaster risk management, or even someone like the private sector like us, and be like, this is what is happening to the storm. Let's get a message out there and be like, we need to be prepared now, or rather stay home, which is more direct message, because I feel like the communication gets lost between a message that's sent the day before and then on the day. And do I act before? Do I act on the day? So there's that's just from what I've seen on the comments on our pages and the people in the public sector being like, that's their confusion. So we just need to find a way to communicate this better, and that's why I propose the where we can maybe start an ambassador program where the South African Weather Service and the disaster risk management takes hands with a few public sectors or stations, and they are there to be their voice and be able to communicate these types of disasters on beforehand, also in a way that they'll understand that this is a warning for the day before and on the day, and also just be the person that talks to them face to face. So yes, I think we, as an entity, as a government, we are definitely going in the right direction. And I've seen how the Weather Service has acted to warnings beforehand and increased warnings, which is exactly what we need to see. Obviously, I think where we can bridge the gap, as I've mentioned, is just easier and quicker way of communicating these types of disasters so that everyone can understand, okay, this is a reliable source. Let's trust this, and let's rather not go onto the N3 when we know the snow is going to be disastrous.
Thank you so much. I believe we have a couple of questions coming through. I'm going to ask my colleague from JCIS, Ntate Ismail Selimane, to read out some of those questions for our panelists to address. Over to you, Ntate Selimane.
Thank you, Chairperson. We have a question from Michelle van der Spee from the Landbouwwerkblad. Chair, would it be possible to issue early warnings in advance for disasters such as droughts? That's all. Thank you.
That's the question there from Michelle van der Spee. Would it be possible to issue early warnings in advance for disasters such as droughts? I'll hand it to Ndakem to address.
Thank you so much again, that is Khade. It is actually very possible. When we communicate our warnings, we also include the seasonal forecast and to the disaster management. We also do so to the public. The difference is the drought is a disaster that is slow inset. It's not as rapid as tornado that will happen within 5 minutes and all that. This one takes a lot of time. And the experience we had before, and I don't want to be unjust in terms of what the South African Weather Service is able to do. So I've got a very short story to tell. Normally when we issue possibility of drought, the disaster management, it doesn't end there. It doesn't actually lead to an action directly. We normally have to come back, get the confirmation from home, so that they then take a written statement, not a media release, but a written statement that actually point out that there is drought conditions coming. And I'm saying this because it happened in 2015. Just before 2015, 2016, it was very clear that El Nino is going to be very strong. And with the strength of El Nino, statistically speaking, you will then get very dry conditions, meaning the water sources will be affected, the agriculture will be affected, and things like that. So because we would have said this in the disaster management, where we normally participate um, on regular basis, we then had to support our statement with a letter from South African Weather Service. So yes, the simple answer is a yes. However, I wouldn't want to go far back as to what it used to happen. I think I started disaster management just recently in 2017. So I'm just only aware that it is possible, but we have to do much more than just speaking. We have to support it with the letter to show that things are coming, so that the government itself, the government of South Africa, can actually start acting, they can just start implementing those levels, those precautionary measures, how to use water and all that. So those restrictions has to come into play. So it's not something that will just come with the word of mouth. It's something that we have to confirm with the letters. But the simple answer is a yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mufokeng. I don't think we have any more questions coming through the chat box, and I also don't see any hands in the room. So I want to touch briefly on something that Ms. Botha brought up. Oh, there's a question there. Just a moment, sir. We'll come to you. She brought up something important, and it's something that comes out of the impact-based forecasting regime. The matrix that we use, that color-coded matrix with levels, in terms of which you would hear something like the weather service has issued a yellow level 3 warning, all of that. Do you get a sense that the public understands that language, and what is it that can be done to enhance the understanding in the event people don't really get what we mean there, and how to interpret that particular matrix?
That matrix is actually not difficult, especially when you are calm. It's difficult when you're under pressure.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
But for the public,
yes, I'm talking for the public.
Yeah.
Indeed, for the public, it's very simple. You come and all the warnings that we issue are accompanied by the very same matrix. So on the left, it will tell you the likelihood of the event to occur. In other words, now we're going to talk about the frequency. Mr. Play just moments ago was talking about how they rated the snowfall in terms of regions. So you now look at the frequency of the events. So in other words, you talk about the likelihood. And then over time, meaning a forecaster should understand the climate. Then there are rare events where you will give a very low possibility that the event will occur. In other words, you are simply saying, this event that you are forecasting cannot be found any other day. I know to the public it's just the normal thunderstorm or normal snow event. But all in all, for us, we simply then rate it in terms of the frequency. If it's occurring from time to time, we'll then give it the high likelihood. But if it's a rare event, we then go to the low possibility. So that's what we do. But the other aspect of the same matrix is that it then shows the impact, how much this could actually lead to. I'll get to the tornado issue, how the whole thing changed, and I think I'll be repeating this for the fourth time. On the horizontal side, we're talking about the impact scale. So that's when we talk about minor. That is when the storms are rapidly moving. You find that the wind will come and destroy two houses and all that. So it will go for minor impact. But when you go to significant and high impact, for instance, level 3, I was saying to the meeting that we had with Mr. Pillay around the 29th of August this year, where the event in Mpumalanga, for instance, it was an extreme thunderstorm that occurred there, from Kanyamazani all the way to Hazelview. That's quite a long stretch, but the difference is the time. The time is May 28 or 27. it is the time when you don't expect the storm. So the likelihood of that event is small, but the impact is very high. At that time, in 2018, we're not using the impact-based scale. It was still very much in the test phase from 2016. So we tested this system for 4 years. So from 2020, we just only use one system. So that event produced a lot of damage for a long path. It was one singular supercell storm, meaning though that storm that is rotating. And it caused a lot of damage all the way. So anything that was in the path was just damaged. So it was a low possibility for the event to occur. But when it happens, the impact becomes significant or major. So that is basically how we interpret this. And the public, I think that if you are calm, that's very easy. At the same time, when you go to level 10, it's easy. Because now you say the event is going to happen certainly. And then on the other hand, you also know it's going to be massive. Just recently, I think it was in either this year, my memory now fades me. It's either this year, June, or last year, June, I can't remember properly. In Cape Town, we gave a level 8, which shows that the event was going to be very high. And again, the impact also very broad. So it's not going to be just those two houses. It's going to be quite a huge impact. So that's how you interpret the matrix. What had happened there, I think there were about 1,000 households which were affected. If I remember all the story, but it was quite a huge story. It was last year. Yes, thank you so much. So this is how you interpret the matrix. It's not difficult at all. However, I need to point out that we kept the matrix as from the source, which is the UK Met Office in the UK. When you look at countries like India, they would have modified this impact base to suit what they want. In other words, they only concentrate on one aspect of the matrix. They concentrate only on the highlight or on the likelihood of the event. We commit nothing in terms of the impact. So we took it as is. We just only are going to work, like I did talk about the tens of minutes. We get 4 minutes. That 4 minutes of 2017 on the 30th, it's important. I'll keep referring to it. Now we have to extend that 4 minutes to tens of minutes. We can't commit more than that because of the complexity of the storms. In that case, in the case of last Tuesday, was it Wednesday? I can't remember very well. It was Wednesday. In the case of Wednesday, we gave a level 2 at 8:30 in the morning. And that level 2 is altered by a tornado at the end. Why? Because of the complexity I mentioned several times. So that's how we interpret the matrix, but there are other events that can alter the focus completely. In 2021, we gave the focus of level 2, I think it was November, over Limpopo and Mpumalanga. But one storm that moved across Mokopane, they suddenly diverted that storm back to the north, towards Seshego, where it then met another storm. The whole impact now changes. The rate, or rather the magnitude of that similar storm changes the whole pattern. But in essence, the whole pattern is still correct. But you just have to improve, like my colleague, Ms. Water, had said. We then increase. But now the increase here, it's very quick. It's not like other increases where you have a huge systems like cut-off flow. So in that case, with the inclusion of machine learning, and I refer to the European case, but there are a lot of other local individuals who are very much capable. They're not necessarily the South African Weather Service employees, but they are doing quite a serious contribution. So it's a matter of us including such progressive inputs, and also for us to develop our own. In that way, we can actually improve on this matrix on a short scale or short lead time. Yes.
It's a gentleman there who would want to pose a question to the panel. Please identify yourself, sir, and the media house you represent.
My name is Azwi Kuwan. I'm from SABC. One of the things that I just helped with right now I had other questions. Is that Mr. Mufugeni is saying that there was a warning of level 2 for severe thunderstorms that covered Gauteng and after state. And the SABC had already received the warning at around 5 o'clock, and that warning didn't cover Gauteng. And such updates, which are very crucial, at 8:30 we didn't receive any. We only received the updated forecast at 11:30, maybe going to 12, and that is very late. So is there something that can be done so that if there is such a warning, that can be communicated much earlier or as soon as you release it, and make sure that us as the SABC and other media houses can get it as early as possible, and so that we can start with the communication? Because if we had received it at 8:30, maybe at least with our 8:30 weather forecast, we would have included that or maybe communicated it. And from there on, moving forward, we would have alerted the people that there's such conditions that are there. Because we looked at the forecast at 5 a.m., there was no forecast, not even for severe thunderstorms. Because with us, due to experience, we know that with severe thunderstorms, there is a possibility of tornadoes. So we always just try to mention it so that people can be alert. But if such things are not communicated, there isn't anything that we're going to do. And the questions will be posed to us as well. Did you see this coming? And we cannot say that we did, whereas the weather service didn't communicate that to us, because we heavily rely on the weather service for such information.
Thank you, sir. You have one more question?
Yeah, to Mr. Pillay. Like, if such a snow event was to happen again, what are we going to do differently this time? Because immediately after, the people or the nations were saying that we didn't tell them anything, but yet we did say there's this level of disruptive snowfall, and we even draw the inshore area. But what they actually mean by that is that we didn't give them information to say maybe the N3 is not supposed to be accessed. And who has such information? Who has the right to give us that information so that we can communicate it to the people? Because if we are not given it, we are not going to mention it. But if such information is there that the N3 is going to be heavily affected, maybe 30 centimeters of snowfall and above, then we are able to communicate that in time. If we communicate it in the morning and somebody is prepared to leave town and use the N3, there is something that they are going to do about it.
Thank you so much. So let's deal with them in this question. Dr. Mufukeng will deal with the first question. Did we or did we not issue a warning at 8:30 on the day of the Roundtable tornado? And if we did, how did that information not reach the public broadcast?
Thank you so much, Mr. Tuan, and also thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know why that did not happen. At all material times, we keep the focus. What happens is, as much as we want to send the focus to every stakeholder, including the SABC disaster management, one thing that we cannot control is the communication effect that may be involved in the process. That's one thing. I don't know why that did happen. It's something that perhaps you can follow through the ICT, what had happened in terms of giving the information to the SABC and also all the media. Another factor is, I just want to touch on the question you asked.
Yes, just before you touch on it, just confirm for us that we did issue at 8:30 or not, just to get it out of the way. 8:30 in the morning, that is.
We did issue a forecast, yes. But what I cannot confirm is what happened between the channel between you and us. That I don't know. It's something that I will follow up and see what had happened. Yes. Another thing, it's our will to issue a forecast ahead in time for everyone, much as we have the early warning for all. it's our will to have enough time all the time. But I'm repeating for the fifth time. Some events are complex, and those need a short space of time. So actually, it could not have been part of that. Not at all. It's not possible. Um, at the same time, the warning was not for the rest of Gauteng. That has to be clear. We're not going to praise ourselves that it was for the rest of Gauteng. It was not. It was for the southern half of Gauteng, meaning that area was also covered. The Randfontein, Roodepoort, those areas were covered. Johannesburg, they were covered. But the Tshwane side was not covered. So that's what happened in terms of the warning. We actually went through and checked. It was there. It is our will to issue a forecast on time, but they are complex events. So that has to be factored in. Just a Sunday before, if I remember what it was on Sunday, this past Sunday, we do fresh analysis of weather all the time. That's why we operate 24 hours, especially in Pretoria and Johannesburg. We operate 24 hours. So we review the forecast. So our review of the forecast on Sunday did point out that on that particular day, there will be, there's a potential, or rather on Saturday, there's a potential for extreme weather in the eastern part of Mpumalanga and Limpopo. And then we gave level 2, you remember we also gave level 5. The reason why we gave level 5, jumping from level 2 to level 5, is because of the matrix. Because all the models were agreeing, all the weather models were agreeing that there's a potential, meaning that there's a high likelihood. So we could not go for level 3 from 2. So we went to 5. That's what I was saying. When you interpret the matrix in a calm manner, you can actually get there. So that's why we moved from level 2 to level 5 to cover the eastern part of Limpopo. And that was within the 6 hours. For us, we think 6 hours is good enough, but the impact that happened later on, in the late afternoon and into early evening, was too serious. So the disaster management, and Mr. Clay has not accused us of anything so far. Thank you so much, sir. The impact was so much that 6 hours is very small. Sometimes you give it 24 hours earlier, but the impact just is beyond what you could give. And again, in terms of the interpretation of the matrix, it's quite tricky. You cannot predict if the weather cannot kill someone or not. So it is not a fair accusation to say that you said level 2, and when you read on level 2, we expect no one to die. We don't predict the death, especially in the vulnerable situation or other vulnerable communities. They are so vulnerable that even a small amount of flooding can actually lead to death. Or for example, the areas that the community have chosen would be such that any small amount of rainfall could lead to flooding. I was driving one time in 2010. I'm sorry to go back to those years, but it's important. I was driving through on N40. I passed Diepsloot, and it was just raining normally. But there are people who are living just on the edges of the river. So how do you say a warning failed while people already are exposing themselves? Another thing that we cannot predict, I'm now talking about our own challenges as a South African says, you will find a situation where, for instance, when there's flooding or when there's water, even if it's not flooding or just runoff, you would need a drainage, a proper drainage, to let that water pass. But there was a case in this booking area where you find there was a construction going on. And with that soil and the dirt that was left, it closed off the drainage. As a result, small amount of rainfall caused a lot of flooding. We are accused, we failed. Those are the things we cannot predict. We don't know exactly what is on the ground. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think.
Um, yes, you did, which brings me to another question. Like the question that he, apologies I forgot the name, but the chair asked a question around the levels. You know, it is easy for you as a scientist and a meteorologist to consume the levels. But for our viewers, they need a picture in which they can relate to. When you say it's level 3, what kind of picture? Because we have stood there so many times trying to explain if you are in the low-lying areas, you will be flooded. If you are in this area, this is what you can expect. But again, it's still difficult for the viewers to get a picture to say, okay, if they're saying level 4, then this is the kind of picture I have in mind, and this is what I will quickly do to try and protect myself or get myself into safety. So what I'm requesting is, if it is possible, is there a certain type of communication that we can make it easy? Because most of the time when they look at warnings and check levels, honestly, they are not calm at that moment. So if we can have an easier way to communicate to them or to show to them on average to say we are not saying this is what's going to happen precisely, but on average this is what we are expecting, so that we can put our people at a level of understanding our levels of warnings.
Thank you, sir. I think you have dealt with it, but we will give you an opportunity to deal with it. I just want us not to lose the question that you posed to Mr. Pillay, about if there's anything at all that we can do differently in the event of another snowfall or an event of that magnitude from the perspective of the disaster management.
Yes, yeah, maybe thanks for the question. I think that we're always trying to look at ways to improve the response and the preparedness aspect. Because you have to agree that in terms of our hazard monitoring and our warnings, we can make certain improvements there, but it's on the other side of the scale that really will help the situation from a preparedness and a mitigation sort of from a early warnings and early action perspective. So, as I mentioned, we do a lot in terms of trying to give an indication to the public on what the season forthcoming will be in terms of the different hazards. And I will also want to just answer the question around the drought, if I can. So I think that in future, learning every year around how to mitigate in terms of this very finicky hazard called snow. We're going to shift our focus more to the preparedness and the mitigation sort of responses. So we want to improve the local actions from the municipalities and make sure that they have those kinds of contingency plans in their preparedness plans at a local level for that hazard. That's the first thing. I think that it's also good for us through some kind of awareness at a local level and a disaster management fraternity to link the hazard to the mitigation. Because the disaster management at a local level is coordinating at that level. And they need to have all the equipment and the sort of mitigation responses and who to call on in terms of that. So, for example, identifying evacuation sites early, right? Making sure those permissions are received, working with the NGOs. Some of the NGOs in that local municipality has their base stations there. So those are some things that they can have agreements with before we have that kind of response. So it's easier. The turnaround time to bring relief to people is quite easy. I think that we have to do more with our national road agencies in terms of funneling the warnings to them and having them part of the response plan. So closing off the toll gates will prevent people from getting on the road and experiencing the hazard, because it's easier to deal with prevention rather than the actual suffering of people on the road, which leads to death. So I think in future, some things like roadside assistance, signage that we have in the more developed countries will assist. So people getting on the road will know that the entry is closed off at this certain toll gate and no further traffic will be allowed, but the alternatives are X and Y, and obviously get the road traffic to give us some kind of indication. I think that other agencies such as insurance agencies can work well for a snow hazard because they already give us a hail hazard warning for your cars, for the regions. We need to spread the early warning messages that we get from the weather services and Volkswagen through these agencies, so that they come to a more personalized interface with the user, right? And then social media is a big thing. So we need to have a better social media presence with the warning. We found in some provinces that when the local radio station gives a warning through a voice of a mayor or a local councillor, the warnings are more penetrable in those areas. So these are the things that we need to do on the other scale of things. But we also have to get people prepared for what to do in a snow event, what to do in a flooding event, how to take cover in a tornado. So those are the community parameters that we have to work on, because everything can't be done by the national centers. The warning only gets to a certain level, but we have to get South African communities equipped to deal with the hazards and the effects of extreme weather that we'll have in the future. And maybe, Chair, if I can just answer Mrs. van der Spey's drought thing while I'm on it. I think that we've done a lot of work at the national level with agriculture and the Council for the Agricultural Research Council to look at drought. So to not elongate discussion, I think that we try and measure drought from a very specialized precipitation index at a sub-catchment level. We do it over a 6, 12, 24, and 36-month period. So the 6-month period is your seasonal outlook. We have 2 rainfall areas in South Africa, a winter and a summer. So we have winter rainfall predictions in terms of the SPI and summer rainfall predictions in terms of the SPI. So if we want early warnings for drought, we must look at what's happening within the 24-month period. Has the province or has the district or the subcatchment missed its annual rainfall season for summer in the winter rainfall areas and the summer rainfall areas? And if so, have the season somehow compensated for it in the 12-month outlook? So sometimes you don't get all the rainfall that you need to get, and rainfall is measured at a subcatchment level in terms of average. So for example, X catchment will receive 100 mils, which will be regarded as its seasonal rainfall. When it dips below 100 mil, that area is automatically in some form of drought. So our early warnings for drought is looking at a 6-month SPI to say, in the season of rainfall for this region of summer rainfall or winter rainfall, these are the areas that are going to be potentially affected by drought. And then we look at it in the 12-month period again. And all of those products are made available to the disaster management fraternity, to the general public. We have a national disaster management portal that flights these things on a monthly basis, and we are happy to then share it with the media and relevant organizations. The entry into the portal is free. You'll find it there. You can Google your area. You can find out what the SPI is for your subcatchment or your catchment area, and you can look at a 6-month, 24, and 36-month period. We have our research into drought has shown us that South Africa will experience drought on a decadal basis, more or less, from a 36-month period of drought. 36 months is when that subcatchment has not had its average rainfall over 3 successive summer rainfall areas. So we understand the concept of drought. We want to make those products more user-friendly and create some form of dashboards for easier assessment or access from the general public. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pillay. I think the theme that is emerging, or the running theme throughout the conversation, has been communication, and more communication. I think that's an area that we need to tighten up on. And linked to that, of course, is collaboration among the various players within the disaster risk reduction value chain. And that, of course, may include even our public awareness programs. We are drawing towards an end here, and I would like to invite our panelists to make their concluding remarks before we end this session. And I will give the first bite to you, Annette, just your closing remarks, having heard all the discussions that have taken place thus far.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I just want to end off by thanking everyone again for the opportunity. I feel like having the discussion is always the first step in the right direction. Obviously, like my colleagues have mentioned, the weather in some way will always be a little bit unpredictable. But we are doing, and they are doing their best to look at what we have at hand and making the best calls to be able to save lives. And as I've also mentioned before, I feel like our next step in the right direction could be the way we communicate the early weather warnings for all. And as the journalist from SABC has mentioned, we also get the same consent when it comes to the warnings that are issued by the South African Weather Service for our platform. And there was a warning issued for severe storms in Gauteng in the afternoon. There was definitely a gap from the morning where there was no warning to the afternoon, where we could maybe find ways of having a forum, whether it is WhatsApp or just another email, as soon as the source does see that there's a potential of the severe storms, that we can get it out as a different type of way to communicate it, more of like a nowcast, where we're telling them the storm is developing. That's why we are upgrading to this warning level. So definitely, I feel like communication is definitely key. And in that way, I definitely agree with Mr. Pillay, where we need to take hands with more people like the insurance industry and social media, where we get these, we communicate these warnings for everyone so that they take it more seriously. So I think in some way, people are always easy to say, oh, but you forecast this wrong, or oh, why didn't the weather service or us get this prediction right? In some way, we need to communicate to them, obviously, that we are doing what we have at hand, and yet again, these small scale systems are very hard to predict. So it's more about being ready for when there's warnings issued on the day that are more of a nowcasting system rather than a day before. And yes, like I think the way we communicate these warnings are very important. Like you mentioned, a person is sometimes someone that can be out there, and a face that are, someone that they can trust, whether it's the someone in the government or at the South African Weather Service, or even someone like us, that they know this is a trusted source to take action, and we know that what they are saying is something that we can, be prepared for. So yes, yet again, I feel like this is just a first step into more round table discussions that we can take forward, and actually take hands and work together.
Thank you so much, Annette, for that. I really appreciate your time. Let me ask now Tate Mufokeng to say his bit. Any last word?
Thank you so much, Chair. But I would always want to answer first. It's important what he is asking. I did talk about forecasting back in the years, which did not have any research. So where we actually keep science as raw science, it's in research. Of course, we can obviously loosen up from one moment and the other. But in terms of forecasting, we are relational. We are serving the society. We try by all means to simplify our message. Let me perhaps refer to the moment when the South African Broadcasting Corporation decided to employ forecasters. That is forecasters from the South African Weather Service. What happened at that moment is that our colleagues were actually battling to translate from science to communication. But that's something some of us who are young try to adopt quicker. Of course, I wasn't perfect. I left the SABC. We didn't renew my contract. But I left my contract. Okay. Basically, some of us who are younger, you know that the phenomenon is there now, and I don't know how many others are there. But at one point, we were quite a lot. It was a number of us. We are trying to be communicational, or to be relational, to be accessible, to make our messages easy. So the science, when we are there, we drop it. Even the matrix itself, it's not meant for science. It's meant to be simple. That's why I'm saying, when you come and just look at the calm, in a calm fashion, you would actually get it. So the other thing that I need to mention, you said very, very important matter. I did say earlier, I said we adopted the matrix from the UK as is. And obviously we're having challenges with it. I'm not saying complete challenges, but there are those challenges that needs to be addressed. One of them, and I saw last week or earlier this week, sometimes my memory fails me. I noticed that there's a tender, and I'm not saying SABC should have interest in the tender. I noticed there's a tender to simplify this to the people. I don't know whether the weather service know about it, but I also saw other people work very hard to bring about the images towards what we say. The challenge that we have is not only, I saw the disaster management in KwaZulu-Natal. They actually put images and in IsiZulu for that matter to necessarily try to make this at least relatable to the people. So as the SABC and being our permanent partner, I'm not sure if I'm correct to say that, but SABC has been with us for as long as I can remember. I remember when we started broadcasting the weather, just maps without anyone broadcasting. We got so much interest as the South African Weather Service. I think those days without social media, we got about 1,500 letters, which showed the interest from the people. So what is coming now is very important. So we need to solidify our relationship by sitting together, at least trying to work out, maybe modeling ourselves from what KwaZulu-Natal disaster management is doing. I like that very much. The way they put images, they explain in shortly. So that's something the SABC can work on. But it would be nice if you are creative on the impact-based matrix, and what you can obviously solidify our relationship, so that the messages that we are saying, we don't rely on words, because that text is very long. I do know that even when we're promoting this system, people from the broadcasting, I know the ENC was there, SABC was there, Newsroom Africa was also there. They were complaining about how long these messages are. But now there comes the issue of creativity. That's where we have to be creative, but together with us. If we work together, maybe I'm punching above my weight, it's above my pay grade, but basically our relationship must be strengthened. Not only for the SABC. I know that I enjoyed 16 years there, but but that doesn't mean we don't have focus on even Vox weather. I think even our previous media briefing with the GCIS, we also did refer to them. By the way, Ms. Water is enjoying our relationship in all our events. She's there. But unfortunately, in future, maybe we may find more others working together with us, because we're interested in delivering our message to the people. Not to say that we are not extending the way we communicate. We do have a media desk. The Honor is very much active on it. And that media desk is necessarily meant to increase how we communicate and to make ourselves as much available as possible. Obviously, the media, social media aspect has to be explored in full. Perhaps that's what I could say in terms of communicating better in the future.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pillay. Mr. Pillay, your last word?
So I think that we can always not put a ceiling to progress. And I think everything we've discussed here this morning is a means to us working more closely together, collaborating across the different platforms. So I think we've made progress in terms of the impact-based warning, the tools and sort of the presence that Vox as an institution has on the media stream, and the improvements in the disaster management responses for disasters. But I think that more can be done. At the Disaster Management Center, we are committed to improving the warnings. So we work across the organizations with many different entities to look at, how do we have different warnings for different hazards? So we had a heat episode recently. Can we have a heat warning system for the country? Is there one fire? There's only one fire danger warning for the country. How do we have an early warning part? So it's always constantly thinking about how we can improve the warning. And I think improving the weather information from a new development of technology and presence, I think that's very crucial for the country, because we don't have a lot of people that are now on SABC watching the news, and so forth. So we need to find other ways to communicate in other languages, using more pictorials and so forth. So I think technology-driven warnings will be the future of conveying warnings in a manner that the communities are able to get it. We are always reminded about the Gogo in a community that doesn't understand the warning. Right? She doesn't understand why the matrix has so many green layers and why is there this odd level of 7 that's different color, and how do we escalate? What's the thinking behind escalation from a disaster management perspective? So I think working together and coordination will improve the warning streams, and our ability to respond at a community level. From a new products perspective, the disaster management is looking at ways in which we can improve our social media presence. How do we manage the school program for disaster management and early warnings? And how we improve things for new hazards like tsunamis across our coastline from a coastal signage perspective. And I think that the presence always now is to look at what actions does the community need to take to prevent the actual catastrophic impacts of disasters. And the early warnings for all message is very clear. Early warnings must be linked to early action. So we cannot expect to not be affected if we are not taking actions, whatever that action is. Whatever those subtle actions are. Get indoors, make sure your roof is secured, make sure your cattle are put away, make sure that you're not driving over flooded rivers, make sure that your schools are closed in a level 8 kind of storm. So we also want to make sure that we can move in terms of those areas. Areas that we're considering, make sure that we have necessary mitigation at a local level. So our program at disaster management for the next medium term is to link practices to the several layers of impact based. So from 1 to 10, we want to know at a local level, when will you activate your local job for a storm? Is it at a level 2 or is it a level 4? Right? How does that work? And who will be in that job for you to activate to make sure that the response is? And then who will sit around the table to make sure that we are making sure that the communities get the escalations of the warning. So closing schools, making sure that we create safe places, and also looking at the future of warnings. Do we have to have a common alert protocol in place for different hazards? Yes, we definitely do. It's part of the early warnings for all initiative. It's part of where the investment needs to go. And I think that if we follow the investment protocol for how the early warnings for all pillars want to be funded, we see a lot of funding in the detection, observation, and monitoring. It takes the lion's share of the funding from a global perspective, and the preparedness and response. So those two areas are equally important for us to be concentrating on from a disaster mitigation point of view. I think we've come a long way, but I also think that our job is not done from a disaster management perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think this brings us to the end of our discussion, colleagues. Let me take the moment to express a word of gratitude to our esteemed panelists. I think they were insightful and very enlightening in their input. And I hope this was so for the rest of the people in the room, including those that are joining us online. And also, let me thank them, those who are joining online, for their participation and their interest in this important discussion. So I think the message is clear. Matching orders are clear. We must just go out there and work hard on our communication to see to it that messages are accessible to the people whose lives, whose livelihoods, whose property we are trying to safeguard as we go about doing our business. And I think it's only that way that we can be able to make a meaningful contribution to this ideal of, seeing to it that everyone is shielded from hazardous weather events, climate events, water events by 2027. And with that, I think we can bring the discussion to an end and leave it here. The roundtable discussion is adjourned.